Hello, how are you doing? I'm Pete Ferguson, founder, CEO of Nemarin Film and Video. How lovely to see you. Shame about the weather, isn't it? We were enjoying 30 degrees of heat and now it's absolutely chucking down as if it's November. But welcome to another Nemarin Live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere. We are live across the planet at the moment and it's very good to see you here. Today, of course, we are talking about how the major TV networks are embracing brand partnerships. Of course, they have been doing this for a billion years through sponsorship and product placement and bumpers and pre-rolls and good old advertising, etc. So that's well covered. But today we're talking about AFP, or ad-funded programming, or advertiser-funded programming, also known as BFP, brand-funded programming, also known as branded entertainment, also known as branded content. The variables go on and on and on, but at Nemarin, we live and breathe the format. We absolutely love it. In fact, Nemarin was actually born out of various in-house branded content studios, myself at the Telegraph, my colleague Graham, who you'll meet in a moment over at The Guardian, and Liz, who you'll also meet in a moment over at Mail Online. So making content that's paid for by brands, that works for the brand, the audience and the media is something that we absolutely love to crack. And of course, when it works well, it works really well for everybody involved. And of course, as you may know, as you may remember, Nemarin is now part of the Argonon Group. Argonon being the multi-award-winning, hyper-converged super indie. They obviously make some of the biggest shows in the world, The Masked Singer and The Masked Dancer here in the UK. Lots of programs with Netflix and Channel 4, and half of what you watch on TV has been made by this amazing group that we're now part of. But why did Nemarin join Argonon? Whose heritage obviously lies in working with brands. Well, one reason is the growth of ad-funded programming, AFP. There's never been a better time for a brand to think about funding TV content rather than just appearing in the ad break. But why? Why is now a good time? Well, I'm joined by some genuine AFP experts who can explain why it's becoming such a hot topic. First up, we have Laura Bessel, the COO of Argonon. What Laura doesn't know about the TV industry isn't worth knowing. Also, next up is Graham, Nemarin COO and Director of Content. What Graham doesn't know about branded content isn't worth knowing. And next up, we have Nemarin's very own Director of Branded Content, Liz Weber. Hi, Liz. What Liz doesn't know about getting brands on TV isn't worth knowing. And last up, but definitely not least, we have Claire Thompson, Non-Executive Director of TV Industry Consultancy, K7 Media, whose recent report into the global AFP scene is essential reading. Hello, Claire. Good to see everyone here and connected, and audio's working. Everything's so far so good. But of course, we'd also love to get your questions as well. So do feel free to use the chat box on whichever platform you happen to be on. We have some amazing people in the audience. We're very lucky, and we're amongst some amazing people as well. So if you do have some questions, do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Liz, I'm going to pick on you first, I'm afraid. Let's kick off with a little bit of jargon busting, Liz. Can you tell us in plain English your interpretation of AFP or BFP? Go for it.
Yeah. Well, as you said, it's advertiser funded programming or brand funded programs, just one letter difference. But it's when a brand works with a production team and a broadcaster to actually develop a format for TV. So the broadcaster will commission it and the brand will fund it.
Okay, that sounds like a really good summary. Claire, do you agree? Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I think it's, it's in its kind of most basic sense. It's funded programming that is funded within the actual editorial content rather than around the program. I think it has slightly different kind of understanding in different territories, where some parts of the content are sort of more common in other countries. So sponsorship's still more the case in Italy and in some parts of the world. But the actual funding itself, is the key. And I think it's how early you get involved in the process that is the sort of distinguishing factor. But as everybody has said, everybody has a different preference for what to call it. Some people we interviewed for the report thought that BFP felt more kind of up to date than AFP, which perhaps had some kind of past connotations. So, and also it depends what genre you're working in as well.
Yes. Yeah, but of course, in essence, it's basically the same thing. It's brands paying for original content for broadcast, which is such an exciting space for us. And we're going to have a quick chat now with Laura, Argonon COO. In a moment, we're going to be diving into some of the reasons why Argonon was interested in a branded video agency such as Nemrin. But for those who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about Argonon?
Yes, Argonon's the second biggest privately owned super indie. We have 8 brands under our umbrella, and we have offices in London, New York, LA, Glasgow, and Liverpool. We're in pretty much every single genre, from lifestyle, scripted, documentaries, entertainment, and specialist factual. We make obviously The Masked Singer, The Masked Dancer. We also make Words of Gummidge and Dispatches. And so every genre that people would want, we can do, and I think that's really appealing for brands.
Yeah, and it's obviously amazing being part of the group now as well. So it's a very exciting time for us ahead. But why did you feel that an agency that has, digital heritage and brand expertise was a good fit for a TV production group?
We really see an opportunity. Obviously, advertising revenues are decreasing. People are watching traditional ads less and less, and brands need a new way to get their message out there. And so we see branded content as a growth area in the future. And having specialists in-house that can pitch with us and bring our production team skills with those branded skills is a really real winning formula, we feel.
Fantastic. Right, I'm going to go back to Liz again. So, Liz, we sort of alluded to it earlier, but perhaps you can sort of reset the picture a little bit and explain how AFP is fundamentally different to product placement and, straight up sponsorship, for example.
Sure, no problem. So sponsorship is where you would align a brand to an existing show. So something like The Masked Singer or The Masked Dancer. So I think Lidl sponsored The Masked Dancer. So you typically get the bumpers of the show and maybe some kind of other assets of the show. Product placement is when a brand appears within the show or some talent endorse something. So that spectacularly backfired for Coca-Cola with Ronaldo recently. There's an example of product placement. And an AFP is, or BFP is the content itself. So it's developing a program that can represent the brand, the story of the brand, or something that they want to kind of talk about. In my mind, it's actually, you get more bang for your buck with creating the content yourself, because you get lots of other assets that go with it.
Great. And a question for you, Graham, perhaps tapping into your publishing background over at The Guardian. It is such a balancing act to try and make AFP work, or if you're a publisher, branded content work, because you need to balance brands' requirements, audience transparency, make sure the content's extra good, but it needs to work for the media owner as well. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and how it transfers into AFP world?
Sure. I was on a panel last week, I think, and you then, so forgive anybody who was on that one as well. But if you're looking for a TV production company, you're pitching to commissioner, you've got to impress the commissioner. If you're an ad agency pitching to a brand with an idea, you're impressing the brand. If you're doing what we're trying to do in the AFP space, you're pitching both to a brand and a commissioner and trying to come up with something that hits the sweet spot. So, and that's hard. It's like, it's a one-man, two governors thing, except there's probably more governors in this analogy, because you might have creative agencies, media agencies, PR agencies, the in-house marketing team at the brand, the commercial commissioner at the broadcaster, and the editorial commissioning team as well. So there's so many stakeholders. So it's quite hard to kind of get the Venn diagram to overlap. You may tell that this is entirely spontaneous, because there should be a little picture of Venn diagram popping up anytime soon from James, who brings the background. Thank you, James. I ripped this off from a slide that used to be in our deck at The Guardian, which tried to explain how Guardian Labs, their in-house branded content team, approach this. So, audiences are interested in millions and millions and millions of things. You just, you don't need to spend long on TikTok or YouTube to find out that there are, there's demand for almost every type of content, every subject matter on the planet. Brands typically know what they want to say. They've got a commercial message to put out. They're not in the trained perception, come out with a product to sell. The brands are quite clear about what they want to do. Media owners, in this case broadcasters, also have their own identities. Channel 4, Channel 5, ITV all have slightly different remits and slightly different flavors of content. So they have this editorial identity and integrity to protect. The hard thing is coming up with that bit in the middle. It's something that does the job for the brand, that will appeal to a big enough audience, that also happens to coincide with what the media owner is trying to do, and matches the tone of voice of all that other kind of pure editorial content. And it's hard. As I say, I think Laura was on a panel last week talking about how much longer at the moment it's taking just straight up commissions to get to air at the moment. If you're adding a brand into that as well, many of whom have been fairly battered and bruised by the last year. Budgets are tight. There's extra scrutiny going on. Every pound of marketing spend. It's not for the faint-hearted, but as Pete said, it's a lot of fun. You just need a huge amount of resilience to pull it off and get into that overlapping section of the Venn diagram.
Yeah, I know at the Telegraph I used to use the analogy of literally trying to get everybody that's involved, all of the stakeholders in the room at the same time, and try and make it work from an editorial and brand perspective. But easier said than done. But when it works, it works really well for everyone. But it is hard. But Claire, from your point of view, would you say that AFP is a key component, a growing component of a wider marketing strategy for brands?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I mean, for one thing, it kind of creates this sort of peacock effect for the brands. So, they are seen to be investing in our entertainment, not just in something that kind of interrupts our entertainment, if you like. So I think that it kind of brings kudos, it brings quality if they get it right. And I think increasingly lots of brands are looking to it as a way to illustrate their values and purpose, which is obviously a big consideration at the moment. So I think for those reasons, it's really helpful for the brand, obviously for the broadcasters and producers. It's a great way to help get those commissions over the line, to have that extra funding. And I think, but going back to what Graham was saying, that the brands often are quite interested, for example, in one-off documentaries, particularly if they're around purpose, stating some kind of purpose. And whereas, broadcasters are often looking for returning formats. So I think that's where the really interesting but difficult conundrum lies. Trying to keep everybody happy over several series of something is the really big prize, but will be great, when it happens, and it is great when it does happen.
From your experience, where a brand inevitably says, well, can we feature a little bit more in the program, please? So I know it's a road trip. Can we talk about the features of the car in this show? Which obviously it probably isn't going to work. What's a good way of sort of explaining that to a potential client, would you say?
Well, I think, it's very much dependent on the audience. I think, I think particularly in the UK, there is a bit of resistance to being sold to, more so than in some territories. And I think that they need to kind of understand that actually that can be a turn off if it's too overt, and actually the association and the tying in of the brand values is the kind of biggest prize. And as soon as, to a UK audience particularly, something smacks too much of overt product placement, or it sort of is counterproductive. But I think the savvier brands kind of absolutely get that now.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a deal with the audience. So, okay, look, I'll watch your piece of content, which is basically an advert at the end of the day, but in return, go easy on the product placement. And if there is going to be product placement.
Yeah, don't keep reminding me, kind of, if it's good entertainment, then great. I'm really happy that you help fund it. But if you're going to keep reminding me, then I don't really want to think about it.
The audience is like, okay, I can see the deal, but don't rub it in. Go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, I just said that there's definitely an analogy from, I'm old enough to have begun my career in journalism in print. And we had like a shorthand phrase for when the advertiser wanted to be a bit too grabby with the content we were producing, which is, can you make my logo bigger? It's the same sort of thing. We were talking to a brand recently about an AFP idea. And it's a beautiful format. the commissioners are on board, we know it can go to air. They said they're interested in that, but by the time we sort of had 2 or 3 conversations about the idea, they were bending it so badly out of shape because they just wanted product in it. They just wanted more product. It's like, we can't, and it's not the same idea anymore. But then you have these other surreal conversations like, what you want is a different idea from the one you said you wanted. So no, we really want that thing, but we just want to be in it more. It's like, well, then that's not the same thing. This is not an advert. It's a different thing. And, you know, even relatively sophisticated large brands still, I think, need a little bit of education about what it is and what you can and can't do. Just to really understand the benefits of being just that little bit hands off, as Claire was saying. You know, don't keep reminding the audience that you pay for it with the equivalent of a bigger logo. It's there's more value out of AFP than just shouting, because you'll just disengage the audience.
And Laura, what would you say is the main reason for a broadcaster to get involved in AFP? Because they're all doing it now.
Well, there are challenges on budgets. You know, the decline in advertising revenue is putting a lot of pressure on them, and it's a way for them to get more original content on screen, and at different times of the schedule as well. And we all want original content, that's important. So it is, you know, important for broadcasters to find different funding models as everything evolves.
Exactly. Well, I think we're going to have a look at some examples now. We're going to ask some of you for some of your top picks from the last few months or year or so. First up, Claire. I think you've chosen Channel 4, paid for by Dove, Hair Power Me. Me, My Hair. That's it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, my examples are all Channel 4, which I think is indicative of how much they're doing in this space at the moment. But the Me and My Afro Hair example was sort of perfect of the purpose documentary genre. And it tied in really well. Obviously, Channel 4 had had pledged to be an anti-racist organisation, and Dove were wanting to get behind this mission of fighting hair discrimination. And it was built on something that already existed, Emma Dabiri's book, Don't Touch My Hair. So it had a really good starting point, and it had lots of really interesting conversations in it, but it really kind of got the message across well for Dove in a very sort of subtle but effective way. And it was very well reviewed, and I think really delivered for them, and got a campaign media award as well. So ticked a lot of boxes.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is a really good example of AFP, BFP brand content working really, really well. It's a fantastic piece of content, really well made. It just happens to be paid for by a brand. So let's have a look at the trailer of Channel 4's sorry, I keep getting this wrong. Hair Power Me and My Afro. Away you go.
I do my hair toss, check my nails. Baby, how you feeling?
Black hair is so much more than just the hair that grows from our head.
It defies gravity. For me, it's freedom.
It is activism. It's a statement.
It's ours.
It just does what it wants to do, and that's fine. We have that agreement.
It's a blessing.
I do my hair toss, check my nails. Baby, how you feeling?
Exploring the beauty of curls, kinks, locks and froze.
To me, it's precious.
As a part of Black and Proud season, Hair Power, Me and My Afro, Tuesday at 10:15 on Channel 4.
Yes, well worth watching. I think it's available on 4OD as well, or all 4, if you want to go and check it out. Right, Liz, over to you. Any favourites on the AFP side from your side?
Yeah, sure. So my personal favourite is the Big Boys Don't Cry, the Joe Marler doc. Again, it's a documentary with purpose. It's where Joe Marler was exploring ways to help his own mental health. So it's fascinating. It's really inspiring, and it works on all the levels. So for Royal London, I mean, they're aligned with rugby anyway. They speak to their audience. It would have massively amplified their profile with their audience. And just look at all the PR they got off the back of this documentary. It was a great success. Ignore on the Sky did an incredible job. So did the whole team. Yes, that's my favourite from last year.
Fantastic. And actually, just thinking about the previous example, Hair Power, Me, My Afro, there was spin-off content as well on Dove's website, additional videos, etc. There was a microsite that was built as part of the campaign. So, Liz, I guess sometimes you can have spin-off content from the main series as well to support the brands and the platforms.
Absolutely. And this is where you can go kind of more heavy-handed on the brand side. This is where you can kind of get your message across in exactly the way that you want to. So have the kind of the hero as the AFP and have that kind of, you know, deliver your purpose and your message, but then have offshoots and spin-off series or digital content or whatever, just to really hammer home that you're the brand to buy.
Fantastic. A quick reminder, if you do have any questions for the panel, feel free to use the chat box on whichever platform you are watching us on at the moment. We would love to hear from you. We've got lots of people tuned in at the moment that I can see. Right, Graham, let me ask you a really hard question, if that's okay. Could you explain the Ofcom rules, Graham? Appreciate that's a massive question for you to ask in 30 seconds, answering 30 questions, but away you go.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, this is difficult. And again, this one crops up a lot in conversations with brands. It's like, how much am I allowed to control the editorial content? How much branding am I get within the show? And actually, there kind of is no answer to that. It's harder in the TV world than it is in the world that you and I come from. Obviously, publishers are regulated to an extent, and there's the Advertising Standards Authority in the background making sure we don't make any misleading claims or fixed competitions and things like that. But other than that, publishers are pretty much free to do what they want. In broadcast, obviously, Ofcom are much more interventionist and much more proactive around this space. So there are limits around how much product placement you can get per hour of airtime. But they're not hard and fast, and it's going to vary from case to case. And it's going to vary on the editorial context as well. So, Pete, you mentioned a car appearing in a travel program. That's relatively safe territory. It is an entirely natural behavior for a presenter, say, to drive from place A to place B in a vehicle. If it happens to be a vehicle supplied by the brand that's funded the program, I don't think that's such a big deal. But with other product categories and other types of brands in different vertical sectors, it can end up feeling like the brand is being shoehorned a bit into the editorial, and that's where it becomes problematic. I think, you know, the rule of thumb is if the product placement or the brand placement feels editorially justified, then Ofcom aren't going to have a problem with a few references here and there. If it's any more than that, then they probably will. But also, you know, the commissioning teams are very good at policing themselves as well. It's the same as, you know, you and I had at the Telegraph and the Guardian. All of our equivalent deals, whether advertorial or sponsored editorial, were approved by the editorial teams before we could start work on them. And they quite often vetoed them. They would quite often say no, because either they weren't comfortable working with the brand in question, or more often they were not comfortable working with that brand, given the context of the editorial environment in which that commercial content is going to appear. And the same sort of thing happens in broadcasters, I'm sure. It's, you know, the arbiter of taste is the commissioning teams. They hold that tone of voice, if you like. So most of these things are ironed out before we get anywhere near Ofcom. But yeah, the short answer, which I realize is going to be a very long one, is there are no hard and fast rules. It's a case by case thing.
So would you encourage a brand that has created branded content campaigns with a publisher, for example, I don't know, Vice, Guardian, etc., to make the leap into AFP?
Yeah, definitely. I think Liz was touching on this earlier in her last answer. There is so much content you can get out of an AFP above and beyond what actually appears on the channel in the first place, that even something that looks relatively expensive from an upfront investment ends up proving like remarkably good value for money. In the show itself, if it's good, which it will be, otherwise it wouldn't get, you know, across the threshold that the commissioners put in place, and that, you know, the high bar they have of quality standards. So it's going to be good. It's going to attract an audience, potentially millions of people, as it goes out live. You've then got the long tail content from viewing on a hub, or, you know, the broadcaster streaming platform. And then, as Liz said, you've got all this potential for spin-off content for social media that the brand can have much more control over. And, you know, if it's something like the Joe Marler thing or the Me and My Afro, you've got the PR side of that as well. So the media value kind of just grows and grows and grows incrementally. So something that might cost, you know, £500,750,000 up front to make, that feels quite expensive. But then if you start sweating those assets across all the different platforms that you have access to, it starts becoming, if not a no-brainer, then something that's much, much easier to demonstrate ROI on.
Brilliant. Okay, let's have a very quick chat about sort of different business models and funding models. Initially, it's a question for Liz. Can you explain the various sort of funding models for AFP, like fully funded, co-funded, the commissioner team chucking in some money versus the brand paying for all of it, etc.? Or have I just answered your question?
You just said it all.
Damn.
So you can either, an advertiser can either fully fund it. Sometimes a broadcaster will say, I love that show so much, I'm willing to put in some money. But there's also funding agencies like Apex who sit within advertising agencies who kind of snap up formats that have already been commissioned. And so they'll kind of pair that with a brand at a later date. And that's when they kind of negotiate media deals around it and stuff like that. So there's probably, those are probably the best ways to get involved with funding.
Okay, and a question for Laura here, just in terms of rights. So if a brand comes up with an idea or partly comes up with the idea, who owns the rights in terms of IP, etc.?
It's definitely an evolving model, and I think every deal is different. And I think you've got an argument to keep the rights if you've come up with the show, maybe it's been TX before, it's your original idea. Obviously, if you create it in line with the brand, there's probably more argument for them to have some rights, and they may be looking to recoup their investment. We're also seeing things where brands fully fund something and then an SVOD will pick it up later. And of course, then they will take all the rights, potentially, or work with the brand on that, and you might be cut out of it. Fighting for rights is always really important, and I think every deal you have to address, separately and see what the best deal you can get as a rights holder.
Brilliant. Claire, just to sort of set the picture from a global perspective, is the UK ahead of the curve in terms of AFP, or sort of halfway up the curve, or
well, I think in terms of sophistication of AFP, yes. I mean, I think we're now getting quite evolved in terms of what what content's appearing, and I think in some ways Ofcom is really helpful for that, because it does provide some level of protection for producers, and so things can editorially be very strong. But it's such a kind of different picture in different territories. So, for example, in China and in much of Asia, brands are very, very heavily involved in shows, and shows, in fact, don't really get, they get effectively commissioned by the brands because it's only with investment up front that they get made. But there's a very different kind of audience acceptance of brands within the show. So it's not necessarily to our taste, but it's very heavily funded. But there are some really interesting examples. So I was watching one from Korea this morning called The Muse, which is quite a funny show on Kakao TV. It's a streamer, and it's a sort of guerrilla hit and run kind of street mate version of a comedian and a model trying to find a sort of muse for a different brand each week. So that was quite fun. But it's really different in different territories. I mean, lots of Europe it's still quite difficult. France is difficult. Italy still tends to be more of a sponsorship model than AFP, as I said. Nordics a bit more experimental, particularly Finland. And the US, I think it's really changing. It used to be mainly only cable, but now network. There's been 2 big game shows. Fox's Cherries Wild, and then NBC are bringing back college, Capital One College Bowl. So Capital One are funding scholarships as a prize for that, sort of a bit like University Challenge, but with a prize. So I mean, I think it's really Australia, do a lot, and Latin America do a fair amount. So it's very different in different territories. But as I said, it's not only regulation; it's also how audiences want to see it. And are used to seeing it in their broadcast market.
Excellent. And the terminology as well. I know that when we speak to our American colleagues and we refer to AFP, they don't know what we're talking about. But when you explain the premise, obviously they are well established in that market. We're going to take a quick question here from LinkedIn, which we can ask to the panel. Which brand would you like to see entering the branded entertainment space that hasn't already done so, and why? Let's start off with Liz with that one.
Damn it. I mean, there's so many brands that aren't in this space. Yeah, I mean, any brand that isn't in this space just get involved. Is that a rubbish answer? But it's the truth.
I'll go next because I'm not going to answer it either. But I've got to talk generically in case I give away who we're pitching to at the moment. I think it's easier to have these conversations when a brand stands for something. So the Me and My Afro example is a perfect one because Dove has been talking about body image and body confidence for years now, and it's been very consistent in doing so. So I'm not quite sure about, that wasn't one of our programs. I don't know how that deal came about, but Me and My Afro couldn't feel more Channel 4, and that territory is very right for Dove to explore. So, going back to my Venn diagram thing, that was, that's right in the middle of that sweet spot. It's just perfect. So I think if a brand has a purpose, it's definitely going to help because it just makes the production company's job much easier in terms of coming up with an idea that is likely to end up on a channel. So I'm not going to name any specific brand, but I'd say
I've got one. I approach this because my background is development. I always think of it in terms of, that would be a good idea for a show. So for me, I've noticed 3 words, the geolocator brand advertising a lot recently, and I was sort of thinking, oh wow, that would be amazing if there was some kind of geolocator treasure hunt type format out there. So I feel like, given that they are clearly going quite hard on their marketing at the moment, it would be a great opportunity for them to do something around a game show, a location-based game show.
Or a live rescue show.
Yeah, or a live rescue show, yeah. I mean, they've got lots of options. They kind of could fit all sorts of different shows like that.
So I guess more broadly, it's a kind of variant of the same question. Potentially, Liz can have a stab at this. Is the kind of sectors and business types? Does AFP work for, say, financial services, even B2B, or is it literally just travel, cars, cooking, etc.?
I think, like as we were all saying, as long as it's entertaining or has a purpose, it really does work. I think auto and travel are probably the obvious ones because you can have, beautiful scenery in the background of a travel documentary and want to be there, so that it really works for that point of view. Finance brands are really coming into their own though. They've had some great ideas. I mean, look at the Joe Marler one, fantastic. So yeah, I think there are some genres that lend itself well, but as long as it's entertaining, it does work, and we can always find a way as well.
That's the report that I'm working on at the moment in the BFP space is about finance brands and spending and finance as BFP, and there's some really, as you say, really interesting examples in there, and it's challenging because obviously you get too meaty, it can be a bit dry, and so I think that's a great kind of challenge for more small business, whether they be small business shows or personal finance shows, to really try and make all of that very exciting, especially for younger audiences who they need to attract and kind of explain finance to, I think.
And Graham and Liz, you're speaking to commissioners all the time. When you're speaking about AFP projects, is it the sort of project where they'll go, okay, brilliant, we'll take the money and then basically just bury it at 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 in the afternoon or whatever? Or does AFP work at prime time?
Yes, it would definitely work at prime time, for sure. But it's got to be, we were just joking before we came on air about swearing, weren't we? I'm going to swear anyway. It's got to be bloody good. It's got to be as good as a program.
Of all the swear words, you went for.
It could have been a lot worse. It's got to be as good, if not better, than what they would have commissioned in that slot anyway. The brand isn't going to want to fund it if it ends up being broadcast at 4 o'clock in the morning, just buried somewhere in the schedule. So I wish, obviously with my commercial hat on, I wish they would just take the money and not be so concerned about editorial purity. Said all along, those cannot stand for something, and they can't afford to dilute what that is by working with a brand just because they've turned up with a big pot of cash. So, it's frustrating. We've had a conversation recently where, we pitched an idea to a brand, they loved it. They've got a big chunky budget, but as it stands, the broadcaster that they would most like to work with has just said no, because it doesn't quite fit what they want to show, in roughly 6 to 9 months from now. So I'd say it's hard. It's a delicate balance. You've got the two governors thing going on, and but yeah, of course, you have to definitely work in prime time. And I think increasingly brands will be asking for that because they've got to demonstrate that ROI. And one way of doing it is with a big audience, and the big audiences are there in prime time.
And you've seen with, I mean, Channel 4, so much more of it now is airing in prime time, and it's established brands like the, Changing Rooms coming back and the Great Garden Revolution. And so things that where previously it might have just been a sort of AFP, music show at 11 o'clock. I think that's really changing. And now with ITV's Cooking with the Stars coming up as well, that's going to be a big kind of shiny talent-led piece of entertainment. So I think, if formats like that can start to return and occupy that primetime space, I think that will really, really change the game.
Brilliant. We're slightly running over, but we're going to take another question here from Ryan. Hi, Ryan. Good to see that you're tuned in. At what stage in the creative development process do you bring a brand in, and do you have more luck responding to briefs or taking proactive ideas out? Liz, Graham, do you want to have a stab at that one?
I mean, it's all of the above, isn't it? I mean, if you've got an idea that's been commissioned by a broadcaster, that's probably the easiest way to take it then to a brand. But then, working with the brand and the broadcaster together is probably the most ideal way, because you can develop it in tandem and come up with something that everyone's happy with.
Yeah, it's tricky. It can work. Mm-hmm. It can work both ways. Personally, as a creative, I prefer having some kind of brief from a brand, because at least there's a signal that they will be prepared to fund something. Again, just going back to my Guardian days, we used to find it really difficult to proactively pitch ideas that the editorial team wanted to do, because they just didn't ever quite align with what brands wanted them to say. Given how protective the Guardian is of its editorial integrity, those conversations rarely got very far. And it's a similar process to the one I mentioned just now with that live example where, we had a brief from a brand, but so at least we know there's money. Okay, the broadcaster doesn't want it in its current form, but at least we've got something to work with, and we can now, talk to both parties and see if we can shape it into something that keeps everybody happy. So, but, it can absolutely work to come up with an idea and proactively pitch it. Yeah. And as Liz says, it's extremely attractive to a brand or agency if you can go to them and say, we've got this idea for a program, we know it will get commissioned, we know when it will go to where, do you want to pay for it, all of it or some of it? But it's just quite hard finding the brand that will fit that idea exactly to the point where they don't want to bend it out of shape, in which case you've got to start that whole process all over again.
And I've got a question here from Laura. In terms of the production companies that sort of in Argonon, outside of Argonon, in your network and so on, is there a little bit of a kind of nervousness or concern around working with a brand from your sort of experience?
I don't think there's sort of nervousness. I think you still need to keep editorial control, because it's obviously about the idea. The content's absolutely king. I think, obviously why we brought Nemarin into Argonon was to have that expertise to help us manage those relationships as well. I think it's about working with the right partners.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
well,
Yes, so I was going to add, all of the production companies that we talked to for our report basically said it was absolutely worth it, but be aware of the extra kind of time and resource involved in managing the brand. And if you can have somebody who is helping you do that, or, full time across that role, it makes a big difference. So I think that's.
I'm glad you said that. That's exactly why we're here. So thank you, Claire. Claire, you've actually got the last question. Lucky you. Do you have some predictions for the year ahead?
Well, I hope, but I think almost certainly there is going to be a lot more of it. And I think there's a real kind of momentum around BFP at the moment. So brands are issuing more briefs. Indies are looking for more ways to get their ideas over the line. And if they've got a bit of funding attached, obviously that really helps with cash-strapped broadcasters. And I think, as I said, if there's one big kind of prime time entertainment format, perhaps, I don't know how Cooking with the Stars will go, but, every kind of big high profile one like that really helps to kind of push the genre forward, I think. And then the other area I think is this area of purpose content. There's so many brands looking for ways to kind of state their purpose now, but I do think it's something that they have to be careful about, let's say, because I think eventually audiences may tire of too much virtue signaling, and they will sniff it if it doesn't feel genuine. So I think although it's a really important area, it's one that brands have to be quite careful around.
Yes, exactly. It's delicate, but when it works really well. So thank you, guys. That was really interesting. I appreciate it. Everyone's really busy, and I'm sure the audience found that super interesting. So Liz, Graham, Laura, Claire, thank you very much indeed. And to Graham as well. Nearly missed you out, Graham. Sorry about that.
No, you said Graham. Graham.
Oh, did I? I can't remember. But that's it. Don't forget to get started with AFP. All you have to do really is drop us a line. We'd love to have a chat with you. We can make the process really easy and enjoyable and effective. So do drop us a line. hello@nemarin.com is the best way of reaching out to us. But that's it for today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I'll leave you with our 2021 show reel.
We are
Nemarin
Film and Video,
the world's branded video agency.
2021 show reel.
Yeah, what's up, Pop?
In 2014, we started a revolution. In 2021, we've turned up the dial. On air and online, across the globe, creating content like this.
What we're trying to do has never been done before.
For brands like these.
It's an absolutely beautiful movie.
It does take your breath away.
Starting to tear up.
Our story is your story.
Nemarin.
Nemarin.